The warning. They ignored the stars glittered coldly across the void as the stalwart Dawn, a Terran diplomatic vessel, drifted into the neutral zone orbiting Varel Prime. On board, Commander Alara Voss stood by the viewport, her eyes fixed on the Yao, massive galactic station ahead. Humanity had come a long way since first contact. They were no longer the silent watchers. Now they had a seat at the table, and more importantly, a voice that cut through centuries of alien politics. But not everyone welcomed that voice. Varel Prime, a station dominated by the ancient Thraxis conglomerate, had long been a symbol of galactic superiority. For centuries they had dictated trade laws, settled interplanetary disputes, and policed the outer sectors. But Earth's recent rise, in military tech, diplomacy, and unshakable will, made the old powers uneasy. Many thought humans were arrogant, naive, dangerous, and today Alara was here to prove them wrong, or right. The comms crackled to life. Commander Voss were receiving a direct signal from the Thraxis Council. They're requesting immediate docking for tribunal negotiation. She turned from the stars. Prepare for landing, and remind them we're not here to beg. As the ship eased toward the station's docking clamps, none of them knew the trap waiting inside. While Earth had extended a hand, the Council had sharpened a blade. The corridor lights dimmed as they disembarked. Armed guards lined the halls, not for protection, for intimidation. Yet the humans walked tall. Among them were diplomats, scientists, and a few silent soldiers dressed as aides. Inside the chamber, 9 towering Thraxis officials stared down from their high seats. Chancellor Vane, with his silver carapace and translucent eyelids, clicked his mandibles. You were warned, human. Your species expands without respect. You breed chaos. You bring war. Alara's voice was steady. And you fear what you cannot control, Vane hissed. The Council has ruled. Earth is to cease all expansion into sectors beyond Sol. Violations will be met with force. There was a pause. Then Alara took a slow breath. We are not children to be scolded. We came in peace. But if you threaten us, know this. Humanity does not kneel. We adapt. We endure. And we fight back harder than anyone expects. A murmur echoed through the chamber. The Thraxis did not expect defiance. Not from a species so young. Vane's voice turned cold. You will regret that. Moments later, the human delegation was escorted, forcibly, back to their ship. They weren't fired upon, not yet. But Alara knew what was coming. This was not diplomacy. It was a declaration. As the stalwart Dawn departed, a coded message was sent to Earth. They've made their choice. We must prepare. And far across the galaxy, in underground bunkers and orbiting defense stations, humanity, once underestimated, once pushed too far, began to show its teeth. The spark. Before the fire on Earth, the response to Commander Voss's warning was swift. Within the high towers of Terran Command, nestled deep in the Arctic Citadel, the heads of humanity's air defense and diplomacy gathered in silence. The holographic projection of the Thraxis tribunal replayed in a loop, Vane's hissed threat echoing ominously. We must not provoke a war, said Admiral Jonas Creed, folding his arms. But we cannot pretend it hasn't already begun. At the edge of the room, Dr. Miran Saad, Earth's foremost exostrategist, leaned forward. The Thraxis don't understand restraint. They understand consequences. We need to prepare, not react. President Ayla Chen stood in the center. Young by political standards, yet unshaken in moments of crisis. Her voice was quiet but resolute. No more appeals. No more waiting. It's time we stop being underestimated. Within hours, Operation Iron Resolve was activated, but what no one yet knew was that the spark had already leapt across the stars. 3 Terran outposts, Athena, Bravon, and Lysar, had gone silent. In the border sectors, surveillance drones revealed only wreckage, burnt metal, floating bodies, black flags painted with the Thraxis crest. A line had been crossed, and it was a young mining colony, Marrow 6. That would be the tipping point. Marrow 6 was not a military station. It was a civilian habitat, families, students, scientists, the kind of place where children laughed under simulated blue skies and old songs played in gravity lounges. It was one of the few peaceful faces humanity had shown the galaxy, and it was chosen for that exact reason. They came without warning. Dozens of black ships dropped from hyperspace like vultures, casting shadows across the colony's surface. The Thraxis raiders weren't looking for a fight. They expected another easy display of dominance, a show of fear. They didn't expect Captain Dax Harlan. Dax had retired years ago, a scarred veteran of the Earth-Karnan border wars. He had chosen a quiet life teaching engineering to colony youth. He had a limp, a cybernetic arm, and a reputation for storytelling more than strategy. But when the sirens began to scream and the sky burned red, he didn't hesitate. He led civilians into underground bunkers. He rerouted power to planetary shields never meant to be used. And with only a dozen mining mechs and repurposed cargo drones, he mounted a defense. The Thraxis laughed at first, until two of their scouts exploded mid-atmosphere. Until the first wave was repelled by drone swarms coated in electromagnetic dust, scrambling their sensors. Until they realized a retired human officer had turned a peaceful mining colony into a fortress. Still, numbers didn't lie. And the Thraxis had them. When Dax was finally cornered with his mech bleeding sparks and his body slumped in the cockpit, they opened a comm channel to mock him. "You should have surrendered. You're only delaying the inevitable." Dax looked up, blood on his lips, and smiled. "I wasn't stalling. I was buying time." They didn't understand, until the sky tore open. Out of hyperspace came 3 Terran warships, engines glowing blue, weapons primed. The TNS Resolute, Earth's fastest response vessel, led the charge. In minutes, the attackers were annihilated. Debris scattered like ash across the upper atmosphere. Inside the command bridge, Lieutenant Zuri Lenar turned to her captain. "We got here just in time." Captain Roan nodded. "We protect our own." Down below, Dax was pulled from the wreckage. He was barely conscious, muttering only one phrase as medics worked on him. "Don't let them forget what we do when we're pushed." That footage spread like wildfire. Across human colonies, the message was clear. No one would be abandoned. No one would be left behind. But more than that, the galaxy now knew the truth. Humanity would not run. They would resist. And soon, they would retaliate. The silence between storms in. The weeks following the battle at Marrow 6, the galaxy held its breath. The Thraxis conglomerate didn't release a statement. They didn't acknowledge their defeat. They simply went quiet, pulling ships back from human-traveled sectors, rerouting patrols, and blacklisting Earth from diplomatic channels. But silence, in the vastness of space, never meant peace. At the edge of the Kepler Rift, deep in the shadows of a dying red star, a Terran vessel drifted, silently, its lights off, its emissions masked. The TNS Phantom, Earth's newest stealth cruiser, held position like a predator waiting to strike. Inside, Captain Kira Malin stared at the holographic map before her. It pulsed with red blips, hidden Thraxis outposts identified through weeks of intercepted transmissions and silent probes. Each blip marked a node in their supply chain. Hit them, and the larger structure would begin to bleed. Kira didn't smile. This wasn't revenge. It was a response. One with precision. Her orders were clear. No civilian casualties, minimal damage to non-military infrastructure, but make sure they know it was us. It was humanity's way of fighting back with strategy, not chaos. The first strike came at Station Vectria, a communications hub orbiting a gas giant, defended by a dozen cruisers and hundreds of automated drones. The Phantom didn't enter guns blazing. Instead, they hacked the station systems, rerouted life support warnings, jammed their sensors, and dropped 2 EMP payloads from orbit. In 7 minutes, the station was silent. No one dead. No blood spilled. Just confusion, darkness, and one clear message carved into the disabled command console. You started this. We will finish it. The next two targets were hit just as cleanly. In galactic media forums, the story spread. Humans strike without a sound. Earth's ghost fleet. They came from nowhere. For centuries, the galaxy had seen brute force as power. Now they were learning something new. Humanity had evolved in war. And they were writing a new playbook. But not every human celebrated. On the moon city of Selene, where Earth's High Council resided, protests bloomed like wildfire. Civilians, students, even retired generals stood outside the Capitol spire with signs and banners, chanting under the synthetic sky. No more escalation. Protect the colonies, not pride. Violence begets violence. Inside the council chamber, debate raged. Some pushed for full-scale retaliation. Others warned of a spiral that could end with planetary annihilation. But in the center of it all, President Ayla Chen stood unmoved. She'd lost a brother in the Karnan border wars. She understood what war took and what it demanded in return. Peace is not weakness, she told the room. But neither is silence. We won't chase blood. But if anyone touches our people again, they will learn why Earth survived when others fell. The council voted unanimously. Humanity's expansion would pause, but defense initiatives would double. Every outpost fortified, every civilian ship scanned, and every Terran ally reminded, humans stood together, and yet something darker was moving. On a mining moon in the neutral Thranis belt, a small Terran trade delegation vanished. No wreckage, no distress call, just silence. The last footage captured them in a meeting with a supposed Thraxis envoy. Back on Earth, Ilara Voss watched the footage. Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened around the edge of the console. She whispered only one word: trap. The Thraxis wanted something more than surrender. They wanted a reaction, something to justify what came next. Ilara stood, pulled on her dark officer's coat, and turned to her assistant. Call Captain Roan, and tell command, I'm going back. Across the stars, the silence was breaking, and in the shadow of an ancient station, long believed abandoned, engines hummed to life, older than most living empires. Hidden, buried, waiting. The war hadn't begun. It had only opened its eyes. The price of provocation, Commander Ilara Voss stepped onto the deck of the TNS Valor, one of Earth's oldest warships still in commission, now retrofitted with the latest defensive AIs and stealth plating. She had requested it, personally. The newer vessels had power, yes, but the Valor had soul. It had survived 2 decades of forgotten wars and carried the scars to prove it. Her mission wasn't officially sanctioned, not at first, but when the footage of the vanished trade delegation reached Earth's open channels, faces of men, women, and one young Terran translator gone without trace, the public changed. Even the protesters fell silent. The galaxy had made it clear. Peace was not an option they respected. In quiet corners of alien worlds, whispers began to rise. The humans were mobilizing, and across backroom councils and corporate boardrooms of the Thraxis conglomerate, panic began to bloom. They hadn't expected retaliation. Not like this. Not coordinated strikes that vanished before sensors could blink. Not the sudden desertion of their allies, some pulling trade, others publicly, condemning the Thraxis for unprovoked acts. What started as a show of power had begun to look like desperation. And then came Ilara's first message. It was broadcast across encrypted channels, decoded in hours, and played on thousands of screens across known space. To those who think, humans are easily broken, we are not. To those who mistake our kindness for weakness, we are not blind. To those who touch our children, our diplomats, our people, we are not afraid. And then she ended with a Terran proverb spoken without translation. Beware the fury of a patient man. At that exact moment, 3 synchronized events unfolded across 3 star systems. On Nexus 3, a Thraxis weapons depot imploded from within. The system logs later showed the weapons turned against their own guardians, plasma turrets targeting command posts, drones turning on transports. No human vessel was detected in orbit. On Elenthos Reach, an orbital prison used to house political dissidents was evacuated remotely. Every cell opened simultaneously. Every prisoner evacuated via stealth pods that blinked out of space. They were delivered to neutral planets. The message: humanity freed those the galaxy had forgotten. And on Jarn Station, the largest slave trading hub in the Theraxis system, the impossible happened. The station simply disappeared. Sensors lost track. One moment it was there, the next a blinding white light, and then only a debris field. No ship, no signature, just silence. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy saw an empire flinch. The Theraxis Chancellor, Vane, called an emergency meeting. Behind closed doors, among the robed oligarchs and strategists, voices rose in panic. "They've awakened Earth's shadow fleet," one hissed. "This was supposed to be a warning. Why are they retaliating with ghosts?" Another slammed a metallic claw against the table. "Because we underestimated them." The truth was harder still. They didn't understand them. For centuries, most species had evolved in stability, civilizations rising slowly, shaped by single moons, lush planets, and long-lived generations. But humanity had come from chaos. Ice ages, pandemics, wars, extinction-level events. Their strength was never in size. It was in adaptation, in memory, in rage tempered by mercy. And now that mercy was running thin. Back aboard the Valor, Ilara watched the starfield pass, her eyes unmoving. A quiet voice echoed in her ear from the bridge comms. "Ma'am, we've located the missing delegation. A freighter picked up their emergency transponder. One survivor, the rest are confirmed." Ilara stood. "Route us there, maximum speed." She entered the infirmary when they docked. The survivor was barely conscious, eyes sunken, skin burned by exposure to vacuum. He was the translator, the youngest in the delegation. She knelt beside him. "They tried to break us," he whispered. Ilara nodded. "And they failed." He reached for her hand. His fingers were trembling. "You can't let it stop here. You have to show them what we are." Tears didn't come easily to Ilara, but in that moment she made a silent vow. For every lost soul, every innocent taken, every hand that had tried to crush Earth underfoot, there would be reckoning, not through genocide, not through conquest, but through justice, unyielding, unforgettable justice. The next target was already being traced, not a station, not a ship, but a hidden vault, buried deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid, rumored to house the Theraxis' most secret technology, slave neural dampeners, genetic conditioning programs, and research into empathic suppression. Tools they had developed to break beings like humans. And others. Captain Kira Malin would lead the strike. Ilara Voss would witness it. The galaxy would feel it. And the message would spread like fire. "You pushed us too far. Now you'll see why that was your final mistake." When shadows strike back, the asteroid hung in the void like a forgotten wound, unremarkable, nameless, and dead to most sensors. But deep beneath its fractured crust, life squirmed. Not the kind that breathed freely or dreamed of stars, but the enslaved kind. Harvested minds and bodies altered through Theraxis science, stripped of free will and stored like tools in cold chambers. The vault was known only in whispers, and now it was about to be found. Captain Kira Malin paced the deck of the TNS Phantom, her eyes locked on a shimmering projection of the asteroid's internals. "They thought burying it in rock and plasma fields would keep it hidden, but they forgot what we are," she said quietly. "Curious," replied her AI companion Vera, as if finishing her sentence. The Phantom didn't approach in plain sight. Instead, it slipped into the asteroid's shadows, riding radiation eddies and gravitational slingshot vectors like poetry in motion. Every move was choreographed, every delay deliberate. Human stealth was never about silence. It was about misdirection. It was the art of not being noticed until the very last second, when it was already too late. On the surface, the asteroid's defenses remained dormant. No alarms. No drones. Inside, Thraxis scientists worked unaware, deep in their bloodless calculations. They were mid-cycle when power began to flicker. One thought it was a glitch. The second reset the systems. The third never reached the console. In less than 90 seconds, 5 infiltration teams breached the vault simultaneously, through seams in rock, air ducts, even disguised sensor ports. They weren't dressed like soldiers. They didn't wear heavy armor or carry plasma cannons. No, the Terran strike teams were engineers, hackers, biologists, each one handpicked not for war, but for what came after it. Because Earth didn't just want to destroy, they came to liberate. Inside the deepest chamber, Lieutenant Rami Souls found what he'd feared. A nursery-like vault where dozens of young alien children floated in stasis, wired to machines feeding neural suppression code into their forming minds. It was science masquerading as silence. He froze, fists clenched. These kids were meant to become weapons, he said into his comms. Captain Kira responded from the bridge, then turned them back into children. And so they did. Every program was shut down. Every child removed carefully and placed into trauma assistance pods. The rescue crews didn't cheer. They worked with grim focus. Because behind every salvation was a reminder, someone had built this place, and someone would answer for it. They didn't stop there. In the command core, Technician Juno Ives planted a silent echo, a worm of Terran code that would replicate across every connected Thraxis lab, quietly erasing slave databases, corrupting neural software, and setting off controlled failsafes to overload critical equipment. By the time Thraxis engineers noticed, half their empire's darkest tech would be smoke and static. Back on the bridge, Kira gave the final order: deactivate the gravity anchor. Let this rock drift. Let them find what they made. The asteroids. Vault went dark. All lights extinguished. All shields deactivated. It would now slowly float through space. A tomb and a testimony. Before departing, they left one message carved into the vault wall. We don't erase history. We expose it. The operation was over in hours, but its impact rippled for weeks. Across neutral zones, oppressed species began to rise. Not with weapons, but with voices. Protests. Data leaks. Calls for inquiry into the Thraxis conglomerate's centuries of bioethical violations. But the Thraxis were not idle. With their secrets crumbling and their name tainted, they turned to desperation. At a secret conclave orbiting their capital, Moon Chancellor Vane addressed his inner council with boiling venom. They've humiliated us, cracked our science, broken our hold over 10 systems. This infestation must be cleansed. His proposal: an orbital strike on Earth itself. No invasion, no capture, just fire. Turn their cities into ash and make the galaxy fear our wrath. The council hesitated. Even among monsters there were lines. One dared to object. We strike, Earth and every species sympathetic to them will declare war. Vane's mandibles twitched. Then let war come. But war wasn't waiting for him to decide, because humanity had already moved. A covert coalition was being formed, species once oppressed, now ready to follow Earth's lead. Not because humans were perfect, but because they were the only ones who fought back and brought others with them. The TNS Valor, under Alara's command, headed for the Outer Rim with a diplomatic envoy, not for war, but for allies. And at the same time, something began to rise on Earth. A prototype, long hidden. A ship built not for battle, but for endurance, massive, silent, fast, no weapons. Just shielding, stealth, and storage. A ship to evacuate colonies if needed. To shelter those who couldn't fight. To carry humanity's soul, should the skies fall. Its name, the Arcfire. President Ayla Chen stood before it, hands clasped, her reflection in its silver hull. If they burn our worlds, they will not burn our spirit. Above, in the quiet orbit, Earth's moon watched silently. The final pieces were moving, and what came next would shake the stars. The fire we carried. The sky above Earth burned, not with war, but with preparation. The Arcfire hovered in low orbit, its gleaming hull pulsing softly with layered shield technology, unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. It was humanity's message to the stars. We will not be erased. Below, entire cities coordinated drills. Civilian sectors trained in evacuation. Satellites rotated into defensive constellations. But for all the motion on Earth, the real storm was gathering light years. White Theraxis, High Command had moved forward with Operation Cinder, a plan built in secrecy fueled by desperation. 4 carrier fleets departed from their outer rings, each one armed not just with weapons but with gene-coded weaponry, biological viruses crafted specifically for Terran physiology. They weren't coming for battle, they were coming to extinguish. But they didn't count on being watched. Far beyond the fleet's exit path, drifting in an asteroid belt under a false ID beacon, the TNS Whisper tracked every jump, every transmission. It relayed the data back to a secure command node aboard the Valor, where Alara Voss, calm as ever, leaned over the display table. 4 fleets, no decoys, no negotiations. This is it. Captain Roan nodded, his hands tense. We hit them, now we might cripple them. Way too long and Earth's at risk. But Alara didn't respond immediately. Her eyes weren't on the map anymore. They were on the images sent by the Whisper. She saw the rows of Theraxis dreadnoughts, their blood-red insignias, their alignment into vanguard formations. She saw intent, and she saw fear. Do it, she said. That Operation Dawnbreak was activated. Across the galaxy, human vessels lit up, but they didn't swarm in brute force. Instead, they split, dissolved, disappeared. Thousands of small ships peeled off, heading to precise coordinates near each of the incoming fleets. They didn't carry heavy weapons. They carried disruptors, EMP coils, gravity inversion nodes. The goal was not destruction, it was collapse. The first Theraxis fleet entered System Z-31. Within seconds, their starboard systems began failing. Lights flickered. Navigation AI stuttered. Entire ships lost orientation and collided with one another. Then came the Whisper, an untraceable AI voice flooding their systems. Humanity is not prey. You chased the wind, and now you face the storm. Explosions bloomed like dying stars. The second fleet met something even worse. The TNS Nova had been waiting, masked behind a dying star's corona. When the Theraxis ships came close, it launched Project Eclipse. Microsatellites that latched onto enemy hulls, burrowed into ports, and unleashed thousands of tiny mech insects that chewed through wiring and propulsion. It was not just a defeat. It was humiliation. The third fleet turned back. The fourth never made it out of hyperspace. Human scientists had been working on something called the mirror pulse, a spatial echo that could replicate and reverse FTL signals. When activated, it bounced the Theraxis jump back on itself. They never emerged. Somewhere between dimensions they vanished. And Earth? Earth watched the stars go still. Back on the Valor, the command deck fell silent as reports streamed in. Ilara closed her eyes. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was relief, tempered with the knowledge that this was not the end. Because in the shadows of the Theraxis homeworld, the Chancellor was still alive, still seething, still planning. On the civilian networks, the galaxy began to shift. Not just politically, but spiritually. Across dozens of planets, people gathered to talk, not about weapons or territory, but about humans, about what made them different. They didn't conquer, they didn't enslave, they didn't erase, they protected. They endured, and when pushed too far, they fought back with something terrifying and beautiful: unity. A journalist from the Andari system wrote, "Humanity did not rise because of their strength. They rose because they never stopped reaching for one another. When the skies fell, they stood together, and they lifted others up with them." At a hidden observatory on a moon once used by slavers, a small girl of the Darren species, one of the first rescued by Terran operatives, stood next to her caretaker. She looked up at the stars and asked, Are the humans really that strong? The older woman smiled and replied, "They're strong enough to never give up, even on strangers." On Earth, the Arcfire launched its test drift, circling the planet with grace. It carried not weapons but libraries, seeds, instruments, dreams. It was not a backup plan, it was a promise. In a final galactic address, President Isla Chen looked into the camera, her voice steady, her words clear. "To those who stand with us, you are not alone. To those who wish us harm, you've seen what we are. We are human, and we do not break." The war wasn't over, but the ending had begun, and in every heart, across every species, one truth took root. They pushed humanity too far. Now, they would never forget why that was their last mistake. What remains after the fire? The galactic war didn't end with a treaty. No banners were signed. No great monument was unveiled. In fact, when the Thraxis conglomerate finally collapsed, it didn't make headlines in most Terran sectors, because humanity had already moved on. In the ruins of once feared stations, civilians returned to rebuild. In star systems long deemed lost to fear, laughter echoed again. Slaver hubs were torn down, not by Terran bombs, but by their former prisoners, armed now not with weapons, but freedom. The Chancellor of the Thraxis, Vane, was last seen on a broadcast, eyes sunken, mandibles twitching, shouting about betrayal and vengeance as he tried desperately to rally loyal fleets. None answered. When the Terran delegation later found his abandoned command tower, they didn't take prisoners. They didn't drop bombs. They left one thing on his empty throne, a datapad containing recordings of the children he'd tried to enslave. Laughing, playing, alive. Human vengeance had never been death. It had always been memory. Back on Earth, the Arcfire floated above the planet like a silent guardian. It was never needed for evacuation, but it remained, still powered, still maintained. Inside were not just supplies and escape pods. There were names, every colonist who died, every child saved, every alien ally who stood beside them, a memorial that could fly. In a quiet garden beneath the Antarctic citadel, Ilara Voss stood beside Captain Kira Malin, their uniforms stripped of rank, their hands bare of medals. "They never thought we'd make it," Kira said, her voice quiet. "They didn't understand what we were made of," Ilara replied. The snow around them glittered as sunlight broke through the high atmosphere. Above, satellites shifted in orbit, coordinated to protect rather than watch. Earth was still scarred. Cities had rebuilt. Some outposts were never recovered, but the soul remained, and it wasn't alone. One by one, new envoys arrived. A Theon, scholar, a Darren poet, a former slave-turned-ambassador from the Verati system. They came not for tribute but for lessons. What does humanity know, they asked, that helped them survive the stars? They were told stories, some about bravery, others about loss. But the one most remembered was told by a Terran engineer named Raoul, who had lost his brother on Mero 6. He said, "We don't fight because we love war. We fight because we remember what peace costs, because when they came for our families, we didn't run. We stood. And when we saw others fall, we reached out. That's our strength, not our weapons, not our ships. Just us. All of us." In time, Earth became more than a planet. It became a place of pilgrimage, not to see the seat of power, but to walk the fields where the valor was first launched, to read the names inscribed at the base of the Arcfire, to feel, just for a moment, what it meant to be part of a species that refused to vanish. Years passed. The Thraxis territories fractured into republics and freeholds. Some remnants still whispered vengeance, but few listened. Their time had passed. Humanity, once feared for its rage, was now honored for its resilience. And somewhere in the neutral zones, a small Terran ship responded to a distress beacon. Inside was a single pilot. She wasn't famous, not a soldier, just a freighter captain named Rhea. She docked with the broken alien ship, helped repair its systems, and sat down with its crew to share a meal. "You're human," one of them said. "We feared you would destroy us." Rhea smiled, offered them a thermos of tea, and answered simply, "We only destroy what tries to break us. The rest, we try to fix." They didn't speak after that. They just watched her in silence, and in that silence the galaxy healed bit by bit, star by star, because in the end, humanity had never been about domination. They were the spark, the defiance, the quiet voice that said no more. And when they were pushed too far, they became the fire that lit 1,000 others. The fire that refused to die. The fire that changed everything.